Hi, boys. Welcome to Daddy Cast, Ancient World Echoes, Week 22. A Persian fairy tale, The Poor Man Who Became a Fortune Teller. Once upon a time, there was a poor man who earned an honest living selling goods in the bazaar. One day, his wife went to the public baths, and while she was there, a lady arrived to whom the bath attendant showed unusual respect. The lady glanced haughtily about her and declared that she wished to have the bath to herself. The bath attendants thereupon ordered all the other women present to leave the place, and they hastily complied. The bazaar seller's wife was greatly put out at this, and as she left, inquired who the lady was and why everyone hastened so to do her bidding. That lady, replied the bath attendant, is no less a person than the wife of the king's fortune teller in chief. Still feeling much annoyance, the woman returned home and told her husband what had happened. "Why must I be married to a nobody like you?" she said unkindly. "Why cannot you be a fortune teller so I too may be treated with respect?" "But," said her poor husband, "how could I be a fortune teller? I do not know how to divine or cast horoscopes. That is a foolish idea you have." "Either you become a fortune teller," retorted his wife, "or I shall ask for a divorce." So the poor husband procured a divining board and dice, and thus seated himself in the street outside the public baths. Feeling very unhappy and unsure of himself, there he sat waiting to see what fate would bring. Now it so happened that the king's daughter was in the bath at that time. She had taken off a valuable ring she was wearing and had handed it to one of her slave girls for safekeeping. The slave girl, seeing a convenient little hole in the wall, had placed the ring there and had poked a wisp of hair into the hole to mark the spot. When the king's daughter was ready to put the ring on once again, the slave girl, try as hard as she could, was quite unable to remember what she had done with it. The princess was furious and declared if the ring was not produced at once, she would have the slave girl beaten. Terrified of the princess's anger, the slave girl ran from the baths, and as she ran, caught sight of the fortune teller sitting there with his divining board and dice. "Oh, fortune teller, help me, please," she cried. "Divine for me and see where the princess's ring is." The poor fortune teller had no idea what he should do or say next, but he listened attentively to her story, meanwhile shaking the dice and gazing at the dice and gazing at the board as if he knew what he was doing. Then he raised his eyes to look at the girl and saw a little tear in the cloak she was wearing, and through it he could see the girl's hair. At his wits' end as to what he should say or do next, he murmured, "I see a little hole, and in the hole some hair." No sooner were the words out of his mouth than the slave girl remembered where she had put the ring. She ran back into the baths, retrieved the ring, and returned it joyfully to the princess, telling how she had been helped by the fortune teller. The princess was most impressed and related the story to her father, the king, who at once ordered that amazing fellow be brought to him. The fortune teller was accordingly brought to the king's presence. He was given money, a horse, and a robe of honor, and was appointed court fortune teller. But very soon he was once more put to the test, for the royal treasury was robbed, and the king commanded the fortune teller to see that the thieves were found. The poor man was now badly frightened, but had the wit to ask the king for 40 days in which to accomplish this task. Then, in great distress, he went home to his wife. "How am I to find the thieves?" he wailed. "If I fail, I shall assuredly be put to death. We shall have to flee before the 40 days are up. See what your ambition has done to us." The poor man then put 40 dates into a jar, the kind of fruit, and told his wife to bring him one date every evening. When the jar was empty, they would have to flee. Now the thieves who had robbed the treasury numbered 40, and they knew that the king had ordered the fortune teller to find them. So, on the first night, one of the thieves climbed onto the roof of the fortune teller's house to listen and try to find out what he was doing. While he was there, he heard the wife say, "Here is the first of the 40. She was, of course, referring to the dates, but the thief was badly frightened and hurried back to his leader to tell him that the fortune teller had known that he was there. The following evening, the leader sent 2 men to listen at the fortune teller's house, and they heard the wife say, "That's 2 of the 40. And so it went on until the 40th evening arrived. On this, the last evening, the leader himself decided to go and investigate. It so happened that the wife had kept the biggest date to the last. Handing it to her husband, she said, "Now we've come to the last one, and it's the biggest one of all." At this, the robber chief was so perturbed that he rushed into the fortune teller and undertook to hand over to him all the lost treasure, provided he did not reveal to the king the thieves' names. Filled with joy and thankfulness, the fortune teller returned to the palace, bearing with him all the money and valuables that had been stolen from the treasury. And once more the king was mightily impressed and rewarded him with further honors. Then one day, when out hunting, the king tried twice to catch a locust and failed. At the third attempt he caught it and held it hidden in his hand. Just to amuse himself, he rode up to the fortune teller and asked him to tell him what he was holding in his hand. The poor man, greatly fearing the king's anger if he should fail, nervously cast his dice, and thinking of his own experience, murmured, "You escaped with your life once, little fellow, and luck was with you the second time, but now you are trapped in a king's hand." Once more the king was greatly impressed with the cleverness of his fortune teller and continued to load him with honors. But it was getting too much for the fortune teller. He lived in dread that a problem would be set to him on the morrow for which he could find no answer. Surely his luck could not hold out much longer. He decided that he must somehow put an end to this worrying state of affairs. And one day, when he was sitting in his bath, the idea came to him that he would pretend to be mad, and thus get himself dismissed from the king's service. He straightway dashed from his bath, just as he was, and quite naked scampered into the palace, made straight for the audience chamber, picked the king up in his arms, and rushed out with him. No sooner were they outside the chamber when there was a resounding crash, and the roof fell in. "My faithful, wonderful fortune teller!" exclaimed the king. "You divined that the roof of my audience chamber was about to collapse, and rushed straight from your bath to save my life. You shall be richly rewarded." And further wealth and honors were heaped upon the poor man, who now became the king's fortune teller in chief. As for his wife, she went on the very next day to the public bath, and to her great satisfaction saw there the wife of the king's former fortune teller in chief. She gave orders that she was to leave immediately, as she herself wished to have the bath to herself. That is the end of the story.